Hi, and welcome to Let's Go Farther Extended Trips 302 with Girl Scouts of the Desert Southwest. We want to first take a minute to thank you for all that you do for Girl Scouting, for being a volunteer, and for taking this training today. We've made this training session available online for your convenience and ease. I am the Volunteer Services Manager for Girl Scouts of the Desert Southwest, and you can see my contact information listed here in case you should have any questions, concerns, or feedback. Please don't hesitate to contact me. I want to remind or make note that with this online training session, there is a knowledge check that must be completed at the end of the training. You can access a knowledge check on our website, the same location that you access this training. You'll see a link for the knowledge check. It'll be about 10 questions, and that has to be completed in order to receive credit for this session. Once you answer the questions and submit them online, you'll get notice of your results. And at that point, we will update your contact record with us in our system. And you can also at that time update your training card. If you don't have a training card, just go ahead and let me know. We can easily get one to you. Before we get started, I want to make sure that you have taken the Let's Go Trips and Travel 301 before this session. It's available online, and it also has a knowledge check associated with it. As part of any troop travel, at least one troop volunteer must take Let's Go Trips and Travel 301. And if your trip is going to be 3 nights or more, you also need to take this session, which is the Let's Go Farther Extended Trips 302. Both are free and available online. Everyone is encouraged to take it, the more the merrier, and they're available at any time in case you need to refresh or review. Secondly, I want to ask everyone taking this training, why are you taking this class? And the answer is probably the same for everyone. It's pretty simple. The reason you're taking this class is because it's required. If your troop wants to travel 3 nights or more, then this is a required additional training. If you're like me and have a lot of questions, you may be asking, why is it required at 3 nights? Why not 2 nights or 5 nights? We'll get into that more later. It's pretty simple, really. The reason it's required for at this stage for 3 nights or more is because you will need to submit additional insurance paperwork that we'll get into. And keep in mind that the whole reason for requiring trainings in the first place is to make sure and everybody is on the same page as far as guidelines and policies, procedures, and to keep everybody safe. Girls, parents, leaders, council. What we're going to cover today in this session is going to be what you see here. We're going to go over progression, review that briefly, possibilities for extended travel with your troop. We'll spend most of our time on planning, and then the actual traveling. We'll go over some tips and resources for that. So first and foremost on our list is progression. And chances are if you've taken any training with our council, especially with me, you'll know that I talk about progression quite a bit. It's not a new concept, but it's one that's very important. Progression plays an important part of Girl Scouting. It's defined simply as one activity that leads to the next, and it's a vital safeguard in Girl Scouts. It keeps girls, volunteers, parents, and our council safe. Basically, with progression, what we're doing is asking, are we ready? Are the girls emotionally, physically, and mentally ready to go on this trip? Are the adult volunteers ready to take them? And how do we know this? Your troop girls and your volunteers at this point should be ready based on past trips you've taken. Before your troop goes on an extended trip, you should have gone on several shorter, briefer troop trips by this point, so you understand the concept of progression. To go over and review the 2 different types of trips that we have here for our council, or how we categorize them, we have this list here. So there's basic trips, which are 2 nights or less. And that's a pretty big category if you think about it. That means all trips, field trips, half-day trips, up to 2 nights. So most troops will only do basic trips for their life cycle. What we're going to talk about today, however, is extended trips, and that's trips 3 nights or longer. International trips also fall in this category, but that's a whole other process. If your troop is later on considering an international trip, please contact your membership manager or myself for more direction on that. And remember that these trips we're talking about today, what we'll be talking about will be extended trips only. And these are very different from camping trips. Camping is a whole different story. It's another category with its own process and planning. If your troop is planning a camping trip, it should not, again, be their first trip, and it requires you take our Let's Camp Outdoor Camping 401 training. Please refer to our online calendar for future opportunities available near you. So moving along with extended trip possibilities, I want to take a couple seconds just to show up this screen and show you some examples for our particular council, geographically speaking. So these are just some examples of places that a troop in our council could go for an extended trip. And of course, it's just a few examples. There's a lot more. But Camp Mitre Peak, Silver City, New Mexico, Albuquerque, San Antonio, Phoenix, Dallas, these are all a few examples and possibilities for extended travel that we do see troops take and are available. If your troop would like to go farther than that later, we also have what we call getaways or destinations, and these are made available through GSUSA. They're on the GSUSA website, so I won't spend too much time on them. Getaways are simply pre-packaged travel opportunities for troops that GSUSA has curated. You sign up for it. It's kind of all packaged for you. All you need to do is pay for that and your travel arrangements. Destinations are trips designed for individual Girl Scouts. There is about 30 different destinations each year for girls between 6th and 12th grade. There's wide-ranging destinations to choose from. A girl would register for it individually. It includes a application, an essay, and references. Then she would receive notice. And of course, there are fees. There's a cost associated with the destination as well. But keep these in mind in case you have interest in looking at the getaways, or you have individual girls that want to do more, want to do farther trips. These are great and available. So moving along, what we're going to spend most of our time talking about today is planning for extended trips. So you can see here in this list that all of these items are some of what you'll have to decide on for your extended trip. Keep in mind throughout the training that I am assuming you've taken the Let's Go Trips and Travel 301. So I won't spend too much time rehashing all of that, but I will review some key concepts that are important to repeat. So moving along to planning for the extended trip, there's 3 questions on this slide that are important to keep in mind with any trip, especially with extended trips. The first one is to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of the trip? There is no right or wrong purpose as long as the girls and parents understand what it is. To this end, we'll discuss the importance of communication later on in the training. And with anything in Girl Scouts, it's helpful to always remember the purpose. Ask why. It doesn't matter the reason, whether it's to earn a badge, learn a new skill, discover a culture, or just for everyone to, have fun. It's important that we're clear on the purpose, and it's up to us in the leadership position to make sure that we communicate that clearly. Question number 2 is similar. Why do we want to go on this trip? It's a simple yet good question to ask our girls. It helps them take ownership of their trip and its purpose. It's all part of group planning, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Just ask yourself this, if someone were to stop your troop on your troop trip and ask, why are you here? What would the girls say? What would the parents say? Would they have the same answer? Those are things to consider. And question 3 is, how is this trip different from a family trip? It's an interesting and vital question, one that doesn't often get asked or enough attention. Scout trips are different than family trips in many ways. The purpose of the trip, the activities, the supervision required, the details, the do's and the don'ts allowed, all of those things make a troop trip different from a family trip. It's important for all of the Girl Scouts, parents, chaperones to understand this. And again, it'll be up to us to let them know this and reiterate it. More on that and the communication later in this training. So these are 3 simple questions that you want to start planning your extended trip with. The next slide here is on the principle of girl-led. So girl-led could really be a topic for many, many, many training sessions. I'll try and keep it brief here. Remember that all things in Girl Scouting, all trips, especially extended trips, should be led by girls. Girls at every age are able to make decisions about their trip. It's up to us, their leaders, to help them with that. So all that girl-led planning is about is making sure that the girls are involved in planning their trip. And trust me, Daisies through ambassadors should and can be involved in the decisions of their trips. For example, if you've been working with a group of juniors, they can be asked to provide trip choices to vote on or research several possibilities themselves. This is a vital step to have the girls involved in the planning because it's their troop. Later, we'll see how we can assign girls various points of the planning process based on their level. And because we're practicing sound progression principles in Girl Scouting, and we know that your troop has already taken shorter trips prior to this training, girls have already had a part in that planning process. So I understand that's not a new principle, but it's one worth repeating. With extended trips, there is even more opportunities for the girls to be involved. So looking at this list, you can see lots of decisions that need to be made regarding an extended trip, from details to budget to packing and more. The more the girls are deciding or involved in these decisions, the better. We talk about group planning in conjunction with girl-led. So here are 3 questions simply to ask when it comes to girl planning and ensuring that the girls are making decisions. The first one is, what can I do as a leader to assist the girls in their planning? You see some examples or some suggestions here. Really, the best thing to do is ask questions, and that's the second point. Questions. What questions can we ask to make sure our planning is girl-led? And there's a lot more questions that's listed here. But here are some examples. And all these questions really get to the bullet points that we saw in the previous slide of all the things that have to be decided on for the trip. And then lastly, a suggestion to make sure things are girl-led is to delegate decisions. Have the girls take on a task, a part of the planning, research that task, report their findings, and make a recommendation to the group. They may need some help with this, but imagine if every one of the trip decisions we looked at earlier were done this way. The next part of planning for an extended trip, and really any trip, is safety. Safety, safety, safety. Above all, our number 1 priority is the safety of the girls, both physically and emotionally. So we'll spend most of our time or some, actually not most of it, but some of our time on safety with planning. The first thing we want to remember is that we have to keep our adult to girl ratios in order. So here you have a chart of the ratios. Now these ratios are not new again. You've seen them before. They are not the ratios for your troop meetings. These are the ratios for trips, events, any activity outside of your meeting. So by looking at this chart, for example, if I have a troop of 14 brownies, according to this chart, I will need 3 volunteers. If you have girls of different levels going on a trip, remember that we go by the youngest level. So for example, if I have a troop that has daisies, brownies, and juniors, I will follow the daisy ratios for all of them. I also want to take a minute to remind us that there should always be a minimum of 2 volunteers with girls at all times. If you only have 2 volunteers, they cannot be related, living in the same house, and one must be female. This is per our council volunteer policies. And all adults working directly with girls, handling money for the troop, driving or chaperoning the girls must be a registered member of Girl Scouting and complete a background check. So when we talk about adult to girl ratios, we also have to talk about tag-alongs. And remember, tag-alongs are defined as any individual, child or adult, who's not a registered member of Girl Scouts, and they could potentially pose a liability because of they're not covered by the Girl Scout insurance. Remember that any adult volunteer with tag-alongs do not count toward your adult to girl ratios. And I know all of this is not new. You've heard it before, but it's important to remind all of us. And lastly, when it comes to your extended trip, another important question to ask is how many adults is too many for your trip? You can have a Girl Scout troop trip that includes family members, or you could have a trip that is only girls and the volunteers necessary to meet your ratios. So here we have troop solo trips or family trips. So you and your troop decide what's the best mix for you. So there's time for both, obviously. It's important to make sure that if you are doing a troop solo trip with additional volunteers, that each one of them also has a purpose for going on the trip. Later, we'll talk about selecting chaperones or adult supervising girls. That's a very critical decision having to do with extended trips. For now, just know that your trip safety begins with ensuring that we've met our adult to girl ratios. The next part of safety planning for the trip is first aid. And again, this is nothing new, but remember that you need to have a first aid kit at all times, meetings, trips, extended trips. If you're traveling in different cars, make sure that each car has one. Make sure you don't need to refill anything in your kit. Make sure you don't need anything additional. It's a good tip to also keep the emergency procedures and emergency phone numbers in there as well. You also, on your trip, will need a first aider, somebody certified in first aid and CPR training, a volunteer. That's required for all trips events outside of the troop meeting space. Since these trips, extended trips, are farther and longer, it may be a good idea to have more than one first aider. It's also important to note that first aid CPR certification training needs to be through one of these agencies: American Red Cross, National Safety Council, EMP America, or the American Heart Association. So any certification training that is completely online does not satisfy Girl Scouts requirements. And for opportunities to get certified through our council, feel free and go to our online calendar and look for those opportunities in the future. You do not have to, however, receive the certification through us. You're more than able to go to one of these agencies on your own or through another third party that offers this certification. You don't have to wait for a council sponsored event. So moving along with our planning, a big part of the planning for any trip is going to be the activities that the girls are going to do. So again, we're going to have the girls involved in planning and deciding what activities to do. And then once we have that list, our resource to go to is safety activity checkpoints. It's from GSUSA. It has an alphabetical listing of the most common activities, from archery to playgrounds to hiking and more. If there is an activity that your troop wants to do but is not listed, please contact your membership manager for more information. The book is activity-based. So if your trip, for example, is planning a trip that includes bicycling or canoeing, then you'll want to check those sections. I would also like to take some time to outline some clear warning and restrictions on activities placed by GSUSA. These can be found in Volunteer Essentials, which is available online, and I have them listed here. So in yellow, these activities require pre-approval from council for girls ages 12 and older. If your activity includes operating a motorized vehicle, taking trips on uncontrollable waterways, or flying in non-commercial aircraft, that would apply. Then there are activities that are not allowed for any girl. And these are uncontrolled free falling, creating extreme variations of approved activities, hunting, shooting a projectile at another person, riding all-terrain vehicles and motorbike, taking watercraft trips in Class V or higher. So just to give you an idea of the information that is available when it comes to planning for activities, you want to reference safety activity checkpoints. There are activities that require pre-approval and activities that are never allowed for girls. And if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. So moving along with the planning is we want to make sure that we have health history records for every girl going on our trip. This again should not be new. I have an example of the health history record here on this slide. This is required for every girls. You want to make sure you have the most updated version prior to your extended trip. It's especially important on your trips. It's also recommended that you have one completed for each volunteer or adult going on the trip. It's really for their own benefit in case of emergencies. It's important to note that this information is confidential, so special care should be taken to safeguard the documents and only give access to troop leaders or trusted volunteers. So you see in the health history record, some of the information that's going to be really important for you to keep track of is emergency contact information. You want to make sure that's updated, current. You also have information on allergies. We want to be aware of the allergies, especially on extended trip. And medications. They'll have a listing of medications the Girl Scout is currently on. Now, even though medications and allergies may not be a new issue because you may have dealt with them with troops or shorter trips, for some of us, it may be something that we have not dealt with before because now we're going away together for a longer period of time, so it requires our attention yet again. So keep this in mind, health history record. Another part of safety planning is for emergencies. We like to think that we would not have an emergency. However, we will have to be as prepared as possible. There's different kinds of emergencies that can occur during the trip. And just asking ourselves honestly, if there was an accident to happen during our trip, would we be prepared to handle that? What would we do? So please make sure that you have a copy of our council's emergency procedures with you at all times, meetings, trips, cars. It's a good idea to have also a copy of it in your first aid kit. Another thing related for extended trips, especially that would be helpful, is to just make note of the closest emergency facility located where you're traveling. It'll be a new setting for most of you, if not all of you, so it's one thing to consider. I cannot end the conversation on safety planning for your trip without also reminding us to teach safety to the girls. It's a valuable life lesson that we can teach them. Daisy Student Ambassadors can learn about safety and well-being when they earn the safety awards. It's our responsibility as leaders to teach them how to stay safe. So here are 3 points that you want to teach. Teach girls what to do if they're confronted by strangers. Teach girls what to do if they become separated from the group, and teach girls how to stay safe during the trip. Now, there's a lot of tips and suggestions for each one of these, but I'm not going to go over them now because I addressed them in detail in the previous training. Let's Go Trips and Travel 301. If you want a refresher, a reminder, please feel free and retake that. Remember that when we're on the road, when we're on a troop trip, safety comes first, safety comes second, safety comes third. So we want to follow our safety trips for smooth traveling. Moving along with our planning process of an extended trip, now that we've talked about planning for the purpose and for adult ratios and for safety, another detail is transportation. So let's shift our conversation to that. When you're on an extended trip, you will either be traveling via cars, so road trip, air travel, bus, train. So now you have some options that you and your troop will have to decide on based on what's more convenient, what's more realistic, what's more financially feasible. So there are a lot of details to consider with each one. And since I don't know what each troop is going to be using, I will refer you to Volunteer Essentials. Volunteer Essentials has a really good checklist for drivers, for example. I won't read through all of these. They're in Volunteer Essentials. You can make a note of it here. Those are just some of the tips for if your troop trip will be via cars, via a road trip. It's a lot of fun to go on a road trip. It also requires some planning and some safety guidelines. Remember, every driver has to be a volunteer. Girls don't drive other girls. These are all according to GSUSA, and everyone has to be in their legal seat, wearing their seatbelts, adhering to all the applicable state laws. So once you have your transportation planned for your extended trip, you are going to want to decide where your lodging is going to be. So that's another planning point for extended trips. Where will your troops sleep at night? Some possible places that you may consider are Girl Scout program centers, youth hostels and dorms, hotels, motels, short-term rentals or vacation stays, bed and breakfast, cabins, or if you're camping, tents. But remember, if your extended trip is camping, you have to take the Let's Camp outdoor camping 401 training first. I would like to emphasize the availability of Girl Scout program centers for your extended trip. So if you were to go to anywhere in the USA, for example, there are Girl Scout councils all over. So if you're going to, say, Arizona, look up the council for where your trip will be. Look at their website, and they will often have an option for rental properties that they rent to other Girl Scout groups and troops for very affordable prices in most cases. Each council has a different process on how to reserve it, so make sure you get in touch with them. It's a great opportunity to stay at another council center. It adds another level of the Girl Scout experience to your trip, may be able to facilitate some possible networking with other Girl Scouts, not to mention much more affordable in most cases. So a couple of points to mention before we end the lodging conversation is that if you have men coming on your trip, that they are always, of course, welcome, but we do require separate sleeping and bathroom quarters for them. Also, per GSUSA, no scout shall sleep in the same room with any person of the opposite sex except members of his or her immediate family. That's with the exception of having family trips. And if you're having a family trip, then every family can sleep in their own unit. If you have girls sharing beds, then we do have to get permission from the parents that they will be doing so. It's not mandatory that an adult sleep in the sleeping area with the girls, but if there is going to be an adult female volunteer sharing that sleeping area, there should always be 2 unrelated adult females present in that case. Our next topic is budgeting. So this is a longer trip. You should already be budgeting for your activities, your meetings, your shorter trips. So it's not really much different. I have some example questions here that you want to ask and a sample budget worksheet. Just a really simple one. You can create your own or get one that's more detailed. Remember, we want to keep the girls involved. This is a valuable lesson in financial literacy. Make sure to involve them, create a realistic budget. Remember to add transportation, food, tips, insurance, and that long list of expenses. Group travel funds should be kept in the troop bank account before the trip. Personal and group expenses should be defined, so the amount of personal money needed and how those funds will be handled should be determined in advance. Make a clear distinction between what the troop money will pay for, what the troop will provide, and what each individual will pay for or bring. Make sure one person is responsible for the group funds and keeps daily account of that. Plan in advance how you guys are going to record and keep track of all of that. Make sure to keep track of all the receipts. Remember, you'll have to provide that at your troops end of year report. And also for checks and balances, it's a good idea not to have one person on the trip hold all the money, all the cards, debit cards, credit cards, and checks. So it's a good idea to have your troop spread that just in case. Decisions should be made in advance about how to pay. Try and pay as much as you can before going on the trip. And just remember to keep track of everything. So moving along with the planning is developing an itinerary or a schedule. So here are some things to consider, but just deciding where to go, how to get there, how much money there is not enough. You're going to want to do a schedule. The girls are going to want to come up with a schedule of things to do each day. And we kind of talked about that when we talked about activities. So here are some things just to keep in mind. Have the girls research activities that they'd like to do. Do we need tickets for that? Do we need reservations? Is it going to be extra? Make sure they know when places are opening and closing. You have designated meeting spots. So just some other things to consider. Now, you may want to have a tightly packed schedule so that you don't miss anything that's exciting in your travel destination, or you could keep a loose schedule for a more leisure approach. It's really up to you, but keep in mind that it's important to be flexible and open-minded. Ask yourself how much you can really squeeze into a day and create some space maybe for some last-minute additions as you're on the trip that may come up. Earlier, I mentioned I was going to talk about communication. So this is an extended trip. This is another stage of traveling. It's important that we're communicating with parents all along the way. So as with anything your troop does, communication is key. We've kind of spoken on the importance of making sure the trip's purpose is clearly communicated to all. Just like your troop has a parent meeting at the beginning of the year or before selling cookies, it's important to also have a meeting about an extended trip. Going over details will help create that clear communication. They'll be able to be well informed and get as excited as you are about all the experiences you're about to have. They'll feel assured of your safety plans. It's also a good time to have your parents fill out any forms that they need to for the trip. So here are some tips on the slide of how to have your parent meeting for the trip. Now at the end, it mentions a trip group agreement. I'll go over that in just a little bit. But just remember, a parent meeting is really important. We want to keep our parents communicated. This may be the first time that their daughter, their Girl Scout, has gone on such a long trip. And if they're not going with them, we want them to feel as reassured as possible. Here is the group agreement I was mentioning. So we've talked about group agreements in the troop setting before. It's a really helpful tool to manage the behavior of the group. So now your group or your troop is going on a trip. So it's a good idea to also have a specific agreement for the trip. So you want it to be girl-driven, leader-approved, and confirmed by the parents. It's going to include some guidelines, some safety activity checkpoints, references. You want everyone to sign it. There's actually a copy for girls and there's a copy for the adults that are participating in the travel. You could include financial details if necessary. You want to make reference to the promise and the law about their commitment to the goals and the purpose of the trip and their investment in the troop, and especially getting input from the girls, making sure that they feel they are in a safe space. And I have an example of an adult travel participant agreement here. Now, this is available on our website. It's actually been updated since I took this picture, but feel free and look for it on our website. I will show you at the end where you can find all of this. Or you can make your own group agreement for adults and for girls. This is just a starting point. You are free to edit, change it, create your own. It's a really good idea and thing to do. When we talk about adults, you're going to need your volunteers for your ratios, and you may have additional adults. You may have to choose adults to go with you on this trip, volunteers. So we call those chaperones. You want to make sure that this may be one of the most important decisions you make for the trip. So here are some tips of who you want to look for, or candidates. Above all, it's important for the adults going to realize that this is not a vacation. They have a role. You want them to be a positive role model, respect the girls, help create that safe space for girls we talked about, support the group agreement, handle pressure, be flexible, overall be a good fit for the trip. So you want to definitely make sure that you've seen the adult volunteers you're taking on the trip, that you've seen them work with your Girl Scouts prior to that, either in troop meetings or in shorter basic trips. That way you get a feel for how they will be when you're away for, farther and longer period of time. Really important decision, choosing your adult chaperones. So now we're going to get to the paperwork part of your extended trip. So this is different from the basic trip that you may remember from the previous training. Council permission is required for any troop trip that is overnight or outside of our council area. This was made very clear in that training. And if for a map of our council, feel free and go to our website. We have one there. However, extended trips have different permission forms that are more detailed because they are longer and farther away. There is a two-step process in the paperwork for extended trips. Step one is your application. So you see here 3 pages. It's 3 pages. One of them is your budget. This has to be completed and turned into your membership manager 6 weeks before the trip. Once you get that back approved, you will be responsible for turning in your extended trip itinerary and roster. You need to turn this into your membership manager 3 weeks before the trip. And this is the up-to-date last-minute list of all the girls and volunteers, adults going on the trip with their contact information, as well as an itinerary, the best that you've developed so far, of what you'll be doing on the trip, so we have an idea of who's going and where you'll be. You also want to make sure and get permission from the parents, as we do with any trip. Now, this extended trip requires a different permission form. So you see a copy of it here, and again, it's available on our website. It's broken into 2 parts. So one part the parent keeps, the other part is for the troop. You do not need to turn this into council. This is for your records, but please make sure parents sign and you keep for your records. Because this is an extended trip, you will also need additional insurance. There are 3 reasons in Girl Scouting why you would need additional insurance. That's if you're taking tag-alongs, if you're going on an extended trip, or if you're going on international travel. So since this is the extended travel training, you will need to turn one of these insurance plans in. So I don't want to go into too much detail over the fun topic of insurance, right? But first, remember that everyone who's a Girl Scout member, girls and volunteers, are already covered with the basic coverage, or what we call the Plan 1. Plan 2 or 3 can be used to cover tag-alongs or your extended trip, or both. The Plan 1 and Plan 2 include accident coverage only. If you would like to include sickness coverage, then you will do Plan 3E. The only difference between Plan 3E and 3P is that one of them is subject to a non-duplication provision. I won't go into too much detail on that. If you have questions or want to know more, feel free and either get a hold of me or go to our website. And then you see here Plan 3PI. I included that here. However, that is what is used for troops going outside of the country. It includes accident and sickness coverage. So that's just a brief overview of our insurance plans. All of these forms and their coverage details are available on our website. So now that we've done all the planning for the trip, and it's been quite a bit of planning, we are going to go on the trip. So a couple things to remember is packing tips, and I won't go over them here because I did cover them in the previous training. Now you're going away farther, so you'll probably have more luggage to consider, more considerations to make, such as how much space to leave available for souvenirs you may bring back, things of that nature. So packing tips are going to be important for the girls. Don't forget, we want to spend time reflecting with the girls about the trip, asking them questions during and after the trip to help them absorb the experience overall. We want to help the girls celebrate their journey of going on the trip, not just arriving at the destination throughout. So, create those milestones, those benchmarks, and as soon as one is reached, have a little celebration. And then lastly, sharing. You can create any troop can become a leadership experience if they do the sharing, the maybe even the take action part where they present to others, or there's actually a couple of different ways that you can share. And I go over more of that in the previous training. So just to review, now that we're at the end of our training, here is a slide that shows you the required paperwork for an extended troop trip. Emergency procedures, health history record, that is not new. You also, though, with the extended trip, will have to fill out the application 6 weeks before to your membership manager. 3 weeks before your trip to your membership manager will be the itinerary and roster paperwork. Make sure you get a parent to sign their permission form for the extended trip, and you'll also be purchasing and submitting for additional insurance for this trip. Because there is so much information to go over and so many resources that could help you with your troop travel, we've put them all together in a packet. And this packet is called Troop Travel Helpful Documents. They're available on our website under the forms category. Feel free to go there, look at it, use it as a starting point to create your own, or copy them and use as is. If you feel there's something that we could add to that, feel free and also give me that feedback. And then I want to remind you that we do have the knowledge check associated with this training. You must complete that before you get credit for this session. Simply go to the location on our website where you access this online training, and you'll see a link for the knowledge check. Remember, all of our information that we have in trainings is referenced through these 3 publications, which are from GSUSA and our council specifically. They are available to you at any time on our website as well. And lastly, I want to wish you happy and safe travels. This concludes our training on extended trips. If you have any questions on any of the material or would like to provide me with some feedback, feel free and reach out to me. My information is here. And with that, I will conclude the training. Thank you for your time and safe travels.